Welcome to Coast Vue, the show that every single day celebrates the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi such a great place to live, work, and play. I've had a string of incredible shows recently, and I just can't tell you how fortunate I am to sit in this chair to talk to people who care so much about not just Mississippi, but coastal Mississippi. I made a comment to someone recently that the one thing I enjoyed about being the publisher of a newspaper was I didn't have to learn what someone thought by talking to someone else. I could, if I wanted to have a conversation with someone and get their thinking, I could call them directly and talk to them about it. And it's been a pleasure to be back in this chair in a situation where if I have a sense of wanting to know about anything, I can usually get it from the horse's mouth. And it's a great way to stay connected when you care about this community, when you care about our state. I love staying in touch with some of our most important leaders in the state. And one I'm about to have a conversation with fits that bill perfectly. I want to welcome my friend Philip Gunn, the Speaker of the House for the state of Mississippi. How you doing, Philip?
Hey, Ricky, great. Thanks for having me on the show. You put a little pressure on me there, saying you've had some incredible shows recently. I hope I live up to that billing.
You know what? You will, believe me. But you know what's interesting? When I first started, we've done over 600 shows now, which is amazing to me, to be honest with you. Time flies. But when we first started the show, the concept of having these longer conversations, several people said to me early on, I don't know about that format, Ricky. You're going to run out of people to talk to. Boy, were they wrong, because every time we turn a stone up, 3 or 4 possibilities pop out from underneath it. And you know what I've learned, and you know this well too from your work, there are a lot of people in this state that are doing amazing work. It's in the trenches somewhere. They're not looking for recognition. They're just looking to fill a need. And they're inspiring the people around them every single day. And I love finding those kind of people and bringing them on my show and talking to them about what it is that drives them. But, man, the coast in this state is full of them. And it's a pleasure to continue to find them and share them with people across this state. You know what I'm talking about, though, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the privileges of serving in the legislature, is that you get to meet all those people all across the state. And so many places, people are proud of their communities. They're proud of where they live. They want that community to succeed and thrive. They want the state of Mississippi to succeed and thrive. And I've said this repeatedly as I've traveled the state. If one area of the state succeeds, the entire state benefits from that. And so we all choose to be Mississippians because we love this place. Many of us could live where we want to live, and we choose to live right here. And we're all in this together. We're trying to make Mississippi the best place that it can possibly be.
Well, listen, one of the things that I really like about your leadership style is that if you go back and look at some of your most significant legislative successes, there have been bipartisan support, and I know you're proud of that. And one of the things I don't like about where the polarized world is today is that you're either on one side or the other. Oftentimes the polarized ends are trying to decide the conversation. Where success often happens, though, is somewhere in the middle. It happens somewhere in the middle. There are some people, and really in the Republican Party these days, and this is not a political show, but it's just an important, I think, observation, and I think it's a real feather in your cap as a leader. And that is the point that for some people to want to cross the aisle or to bring others into the fold that may have a different philosophical point of view, they immediately say that if you talk to the other side at all, you're a rhino. That's the new famous word, that you can't even talk to someone who has a different point of view. That's a terrible trend, isn't it?
Well, yes, and I think that a lot of times people would benefit from understanding how the legislative process works. And I've learned that many of our citizens don't really understand sometimes exactly what is required to pass a piece of legislation. And I don't want to get off in a ditch here, but the citizens would benefit from knowing that the threshold to pass a piece of legislation changes with the type of bill that it is. So when we're talking about a general bill, which would be implementing a crime, for example. We declare a certain act to be a crime. That's just a general bill. The threshold there is the majority of those present and voting. So I have 122 members in the House of Representatives. Half of that is 61. A majority is 62. So if all 122 members are here that day, I got to have 62 votes to pass a general bill. But if I have a COVID outbreak and I got 30 members out and I've only got 90 people here that day, I can pass a general bill with 46 votes because a majority of those present and voting is only 46. But an appropriation bill, like a teacher pay raise, for example, is a majority of those elected. It's a different standard. And so if I got 70 people here that day, I still got to get 62 of them to pass an appropriation bill. Now that leads me to the next threshold, which is a tax or revenue bill. And as you know, we gave the largest tax cut in history this last session. It emanated from the House. I want to brag on my House members for leading out on that. But the threshold there is a 3/5 vote. It's not a simple majority. That's 74 votes on my end of the building. So in that instance, you do have to reach across the aisle, whether you want to or not. If we're going to give our citizens a tax break, if we're going to give them a tax cut, which I would argue most Republicans strongly support, I got to be able to compile 74 votes on my end of the building. Well, I've only got 75 or 6 Republicans. So you got to be able to get every one of them on board, or you got to be able to reach across the aisle. And that's just one example. On a bill that changes the Constitution, that's a 2/3 vote. That's 81 votes, which means I don't have 81 Republicans. So there are certain situations that require reaching across the aisle. I will tell you that most of what people see on the news are just those occasions where we end up fussing and fighting. But I would argue that 98% of the time we're all voting alike. It's just those few occasions where we have controversial issues that result in great long debates, and people see that and think that's what we do all the time, and that's just not the case. I think as a state, we all live together. We've got to learn how to get along together, and we may disagree on certain issues. I tell people this all the time. I don't agree with my wife all the time. Certainly don't agree with her 98% of the time. But we don't fall out over it, and we don't, leave one another. We just learn to work through it and get along. And I think the state would be better off if we did more of that rather than trying to make the people who view things differently the enemy. And that's not just between the two parties. That occurs within each of the parties. You have, Republicans who get mad at other Republicans because they don't agree with the way that they think. And we've got to learn how to get along and work through these issues like we do in all of our relationships.
Listen, I've had a couple of shows recently. There was this really incredible graphic that was put out, and it showed 33 things that are wrong with media today. And when media, meaning it could be social media, it could be an app platform that distributes news, it could be CNN. Fox, it could be newspapers, any media, and it showed the complexities of it. The first conversation I had was with Senator Jeremy England, who has given a lot of thought to a lot of this, and he's very strong conservative, but he believes that the more you listen to the other side, the better the outcome is going to be, and that compromise and listening is an important characteristic in politics. And too often, unfortunately, it's missing, or at least we're not talking enough about that. As you pointed out, sometimes it's just a polarizing issue that gets to public awareness, when in fact lots of things are happening on a daily basis where you're working closely together, but especially on the national level. And we talked about that. Then I had a Pulitzer Prize winning writer and editor who used to work with me in New Orleans, James O'Byrne, who actually lives in France now, is retired, extraordinarily smart guy. But when you think about the complexities of social media and the way they're using advanced artificial intelligence to determine people's news feeds, and how it literally encouraging division, encouraging polarization, it misleading people, lots of fake news. I could go on and on. You know the whole story. You know what I'm talking about. It makes it harder, doesn't it? It makes it harder to have these rational conversations when people have dug in because they've got a news feed that makes it appear that everybody agrees with them. And then when you suddenly don't agree, you're somehow an outlier when in fact you're not the outlier. The person that you're talking to is actually the outlier, but would never admit it. That's a tough part of the conversation, isn't it?
Yes, and I grow frustrated with the media outlets who, and we're talking print media, we're talking television, we're talking all forms of outlets, who deviate or get away from just reporting the facts, and they shade the facts to fit a particular message they want to deliver, or they sensationalize, or they dramatize something, or even put conclusions in an article. Now, there's an editorial page and an opinion page on most platforms where you can do that kind of thing. But when you're just reporting the news, it is frustrating for us as politicians when they slant the facts. I've had many situations where all the facts were just not reported, and they will tell you. They may not lie, they may not misrepresent some facts, but they don't include all the facts.
Let's do this.
Go ahead.
Let's continue this part. We're at the end of the segment. We'll actually pick it up right there on the other side. But this is Speaker Philip Gunn from the Mississippi House of Representatives. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to Coast Vue. I have my friend, Speaker of the House, Philip Gunn, with us from Mississippi House of Representatives. And when we went to break, we were just talking about, maybe lamenting to some extent, that media is not what it used to be. And, I had the opportunity to be a publisher for 3 amazing Pulitzer Prize-winning newspapers, and I know what it looks like to work hard to keep bias out of the news pages. I know the layers of editors that it takes. I know the kind of conversations that take place behind the scenes. I know the role of an editorial page, and I really covet the days. Maybe one day we'll see that again. I'm afraid the genie might be a bit out of the bottle now, but I do miss the days where there was a lot of differentiating. Hey, listen, it was even tough then. There were accusations of bias even then, and there were accusations of trust even then. But with media fragmentation that has taken place, and the loss of the layers of editing and oversight, and the work around checks and balances and corroboration of sources and all of that, those days are mostly gone now, because the organizations that had most of the journalists were in the newspapers, and that just, they don't have the resources anymore. It's a kind of a Wild West world that we're in now from a media point of view, isn't it, Philip?
Well, it feels that way, and let me first of all say how much I appreciate your passion for good journalism. I know you were the editor of that paper for many, many years, and you come from the old school. And I've talked to many who are my age or around my age, who come from that day and time where journalists were out to find the truth. And I think that's what we all seek through journalism. We just want the truth. Report the facts, report the truth, and then let the reader draw the conclusion from that. And that's a frustrating part from what we do, is that they don't always report either the truth or the whole truth. I've been in committee meetings before and seen what took place in the room, and then read the article the next day, and I'm like, I was there. That ain't what happened. That is not the point that was made. And they are reporting what they want to report. They're being selective rather than being truthful and or complete. And I think that's what we all long for as readers, as citizens. Anytime we watch the news, anytime we read a newspaper article, we just want to know what the facts are. We want to know what the truth is. And they seem to have forgotten that so many times, and they go into these situations where they are not only slanting the reporting, selectively reporting what they want to report, but then push forward and tell you what you ought to think about it and what conclusions you ought to draw, or raise these rhetorical questions which imply that someone has done something wrong. So I remember one article a few years ago that the entire article went on about one of my legislators and something they had done. Or the headline was, "Did they do this?" And they wrote this entire article speculating whether or not that happened. And then the last sentence of the article was, at the end of the day, they didn't do whatever it was they raised the question about. That's so many people. You got to read all the way to the end of the article to get the truth, and that the headlines sometimes don't reflect that. So, yes, it's a very frustrating thing to be involved with, and I tell people you can't always believe everything you see or hear.
It's really unfortunate. I used to give speeches. Well, I gave speeches all the time as a publisher, and often I would always say, that newspapers were really critical in society. I will speak specifically about newspapers and the unique responsibilities we had in the communities we served were uniquely important to helping to keep our democracy viable. Now, when I would say those words, I would think, God, that sounds kind of textbooky and whatever. It felt, is it real? And I would come to the realization that it is as real as it possibly can be. But it wasn't until after Hurricane Katrina that I had the opportunity to work to rebuild our newspaper and work in helping to rebuild our community. And I really understood this point, that the role of the newspaper is to give facts, as many facts as we possibly can. If we have an editorial view about something, we put it on the editorial page and we have those appropriate fights. But at the end of the day, is to give facts to the citizenry so they can then take those facts and decide how they choose to what their position is going to be on things. That we wanted to give them the information so they could watch after local officials who were trying to decide, how are we going to rebuild, and is it going to rebuild the way that our citizens want us to rebuild, and provide that kind of information. But I really came to understand after Katrina how critical that role was. When that information is provided with bias, though, what happens is you don't have an editorial page anymore. It starts to kind of drift into your journalism. And, I've seen that in Mississippi. And I won't name any organization names here, but I've seen bias. What's happened is you have what used to be the corporate newspaper groups now that are owned mostly by venture capital firms. You've got nonprofit journalistic efforts that have come along that are often funded by rich people. And if you start to kind of look at, follow the money, what you begin to understand is that a lot of times they're not conservative. And so does that affect their ability to cover a state like Mississippi where the majority, or if not all of those statewide leaders are conservative? So you can't help but ask the questions about bias. And what I would like the last thing I'll say on the subject, and you can close it out and we'll move on, but is that sometimes great reporting can be completely blown up when bias sneaks in, or someone's chip on their shoulder that has a political bend to it, where they disagree with the political point of view of the person that they're covering. When that sneaks into the story, this chip on the shoulder, then it plays well to a certain group of people who disagree with that public official, but it's not what I would refer to as unbiased, objective information providing. And we've gotten away from that too often in this state, unfortunately. And I hope one day we can get it back again. Any final word on that?
Well, I think the citizens deserve that. I think the citizens deserve the truth. As I said a few minutes ago, I think what everybody wants is just, what is the truth? What are the true facts? And let me decide for myself. I will tell you, I've had numerous articles written about me, something I've said or something I did, or about me personally, where the reporter never even called me for a comment. Now, how complete can the reporting be when the reporter never even reaches out to you to say, what do you have to say about this? That reflects, I think, an agenda, if you will, on their part to make me or whoever the official is look bad. And I've had other occasions where they'll call just to say that they did call, but they'll say, my deadline is an hour. I got to go to press at 4 o'clock. And do you have a comment about this? Well, I had an occasion recently where I was in North Mississippi. I was giving a speech to a Rotary Club in North Mississippi, and I had a meeting in Memphis after that. It was 3:30 in the afternoon before I ever received notification that this particular reporter was going to press with an article at 4 o'clock. It was not a fair attempt to find the truth or to present my side of the issue. It was certainly an agenda on their part to try to present whatever image or impression they wanted the reader to have. And that's sad. It's unfortunate that so many in our media have gotten, and I will say some are not that way. We can't just paint them all with a broad brush. We can't just do that.
Agree.
I don't like it when people paint Republicans with a broad brush, or lawyers, or building contractors. Yes, there are some few bad actors out there. So we can't say that about everybody, but there are some, particularly in Mississippi, who want to push an agenda and, as you say, attack Republicans and make them all look bad and evil, and that's just not fair or right.
It's called narrative reporting. They develop a narrative,
That's
then
true.
the reporting fits within the narrative. They don't want reporting that doesn't fit the narrative. And it's an unfortunate approach, and that's not what journalism is all about.
Right.
Believe me, I know well. I've seen great journalism, and that's not great journalism.
I would liken it to some preachers, Ricky. A preacher's supposed to tell you what the Bible says, but I've seen some preachers who have a message they want to deliver, and they go find a verse of scripture that they think supports what they want to say, and they read that verse of scripture, and then they preach the message they want to preach. Versus just tell me what the Bible says. And that's I think it's a good analogy of what we're talking about here.
I think that's a great analogy. And the best preachers, in my case, priests that I have enjoyed, are those who don't try to do a lot of interpreting for me, but
just tell me what the Bible says. That's what I mean.
Yeah, that is for sure. Listen, I know that during the off times, the legislature, you've got a real job you got to do. You travel across the state. You have the Neshoba County Fair that occurs, and what a great way to touch base with other elected officials and citizens. But, there's always something going on in your life, isn't there?
Well, yes, sir. I'm very privileged to serve in the role as speaker, and a lot of people don't even know what the speaker is or does, but it is the counterpart to the lieutenant governor. We run the legislature. The lieutenant governor presides over the Senate. The speaker presides over the House. We appoint the committee chairman. We are able to assign the bills to the committees. We put the members on the committees. We are paid the exact same amount of money. We perform the exact same functions. The only difference is the citizens get to vote on the lieutenant governor, and the members of the House elect the speaker. So I've been very honored and privileged to be elected by my colleagues in the House now for 3 terms. And with that comes a whole lot of responsibilities that occur during the off season. As you rightly point out, the legislative process does not end for me. Most of our members go back to their normal lifestyles, their normal jobs during the off season. But there are continuous meetings with people getting prepared for next season. There are a number of legislative organizations that I serve on. People are always asking me to come and give a legislative report. Recap, if you will, the Bankers Association.
Let's do this. I actually want to spend the entire next segment talking about the kind of things people want to talk about. So when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Philip Gunn, the Speaker of the House for Mississippi Legislature. We'll see you when we come back. Welcome back to Coast Vue. I have Philip Gunn, the Speaker of the House for the Mississippi Legislature, with us. And when we went to break, we're talking about the off season when you're not in legislature. Your real job, you got to do a real job for Speaker. You're traveling the state. You're talking to various different constituencies. And people want to talk about the past legislative session and about the coming legislative session. There's no shortage of things to talk about when you're on the road, I bet, huh, Philip?
Oh, absolutely. And I will say that this past legislative session, the 2022 session, was historic. I'm very proud of what the legislature did, particularly the House of Representatives where I serve. As you know, we passed the largest teacher pay raise in the history of the state. We passed the largest tax cut in the history of the state. We did medical marijuana. We did the ARPA funds. We balanced the budget. We had about 12 different items that we took on this year, any one of which could have expended a lot of capital, political capital, and a lot of energy and time. We meet 3 months out of the year, and generally, if you take one major legislative item and you do it, you would call that a successful session. Well, we had about 12 that we did this time. And we were talking earlier about the media. One of the media outlets wrote an article on January the 4th when we convened last year, questioning, can Republicans do everything that they've got to do? And they rattled off about 7 different major pieces of legislation, many of which I just mentioned, questioning whether or not Republicans could get it done. Well, at the end of the session, I always have a post-session press conference. And when that particular reporter walked into the room, I had that article. And I handed it to him and I said, hey, you wrote an article 3 months ago questioning whether we could get these things done. I said, you can check the box on every one of them, plus some. And I said, I want you now to write an article telling that we did it. And he laughed and I didn't. And I said, I'm not kidding. I'm serious. You're going to charge out there and write an article questioning whether we can get these things done. Now you need to write an article giving us credit for getting those things done. So when his article came out, he gave us a paragraph. So I guess that's the best I could get. That's the best I could get out of him.
Yeah,
but they always
you have to look at that as a win.
We didn't get done, but I will tell you, the last session was historic. As I said, we did about 12 major pieces of legislation that will transform the state. The largest tax cut in history, which puts more money back in the pockets of our citizens, which they can better able to provide for themselves, improve their quality of life, provide for their children, give more to their church. The list of benefits just goes on and on. The largest teacher pay raise in history. Teachers in Mississippi should be making $15,000 more today than they were 10 years ago when Republicans took over. We have given 4 teacher pay raises over the last 10 years, a $2,500 raise, a $1,500 raise, a $1,000 raise, and this year a raise, depending on the number of years that they served, anywhere between $4,000 and $6,000. That's enormous. We combine that with the step raises that they get every year, which is a $500 increase, it's about $15,000. That's huge. So we are delivering on the things that we promised that we would deliver on. And when the off season comes, so many people invite me to come and speak to the Rotary Club or the Lions Club or Republican Women or wherever, and give that legislative recap. And I'm always proud and privileged. I love traveling the state and seeing our citizens and talking to the folks and letting them hear what their legislature is doing. In addition to that, I've gotten overcommitted, I guess. I've served on a number of national boards that are politically minded, policy think tanks and that sort of thing. And they have meetings, and I have to go to those throughout the year. And then, of course, you have the different associations in Mississippi, like the lawyers and the bankers and the nurses and the whoever, and they always have their convention, and they're always on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And I get the municipal league, supervisors, sheriff's association. I mean, the list just goes on. And I get to come down there and give legislative reports to them as well. In fact, back in 2017, I think it was, I was privileged to serve as the president of the Southern Legislative Conference. This is an organization of the 15 southernmost states. And I was the president, which meant I got the privilege of hosting it. And I chose the Mississippi Gulf Coast as the host site. And we had legislators from 15 different states around the Southeast come to the Mississippi Gulf Coast and spend 4 days there. You'll be pleased to know that conference was the largest in the history of that organization. I was very proud of that fact. And what happens is they come to the coast, they have a great time, and they go back home and tell all their constituents and their friends, we went to the Mississippi Gulf Coast, had a great time. Y'all need to go too. And hopefully we reap benefits from them coming and visiting. So those just a little bit of an example of the things that I do during the off season. Plus you have people coming to want to talk to you, getting ready for the next year. So we're entering that phase right now.
Well, look, you mentioned the Mississippi Municipal League. As you know, SuperTalk did a live remote from there. I did a Coast Vue show there live. And here's my observation. When I pulled up, I really didn't know what to expect, to be honest with you. I pulled up and got there kind of early, and the parking lot was literally already full. I mean, it was incredible. It was full. And most of the leaders that I talked to, they were well, I would think they were not necessarily completely surprised, but they were certainly pleasantly surprised to see how many people were there. And what they think is that during COVID, a lot of leaders had to be challenged and had to make adjustments and had to be creative and innovative and so on. They worked together probably in ways across jurisdictions in ways they never have before. And they really came to the Mississippi Municipal League meeting this year to touch base with each other, to learn from each other. They're probably more interested in listening to other successes and other possibilities. They really needed to hear from state leaders about the dynamic legislative session that had just happened. But man, it was kind of inspiring to see so many state leaders in one room at one time, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think you're right. For 2 years, some of these organizations haven't met for 2 years. They didn't meet in 2020 because of COVID, and they chose not to meet in 21 because of COVID. And this is kind of the first time they've been able to reconvene and see one another, and they're excited to be there. But that's the benefit of that type of meeting, is that they all come to one location. They bring in experts on different issues that these cities and or counties are fighting. water issues, zoning issues, garbage collection. I mean, the list just goes on and on. And they are able to share ideas and talk to one another and find out successes and failures that others have had and share ideas and hear from policy experts. So that's the benefit of those types of meetings.
You know, I had the opportunity last couple of years, to watch the legislative process pretty closely because I was so passionate about the Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund. So because of that, and because of staying in touch with some very key people, I was a little bit closer to the legislative process than I normally would be. And, you know, when I look back on the legislative process, especially last year, just look as an outsider watching it, it seemed like a grind to me. And it's maybe in some ways the reporter that reported what he reported was probably right to some extent, that in the typical legislative session, you might get one or two big issues done, but you're not going to get a bunch. You're just not going to, especially in an environment where leaders probably could do a better job of working together at times. I'm just making a general observation about that. But here it was a grind, and there was an amazing amount of stuff that was going on behind the scenes. And I don't know if there was ever a time when you weren't in a meeting in some way, having to be passionate about some aspect. I mean, income tax would have been enough by itself. But when you look back on it, do you feel, I know you see the successes, you ended on a really great note, you found the compromises to find success, et cetera, but it had to have been a grind to be in your position.
Well, this past legislative session, obviously, it's the most historic in modern times. As I said, we did about 12 major things. I wish I had the list here in front of me. I could rattle them off to you, but I mentioned the ones that just come to mind: the largest teacher pay raise, largest tax cut ever, the ARPA funds, distributing the ARPA funds, taking on the medical marijuana, the other things that I can't recall right now. About 12 huge lifts that we did. And so, yes, it's very challenging to take on any one of those issues by itself, but to take on 12 of them expended a lot of time and energy and political capital. And it is a grind. And people always say two things you don't want to see being made, and that is sausage and legislation. It is a difficult thing. But, you know, the founders of our country and the founders of our state made it that way on purpose. The founders of our country did not want a strong central government. They wanted the power to be reserved to the states. They had just come out of England, where they had a strong central figure with the king, and they didn't want that. And so they designed our country to be one where the federal government is very limited, and they can only do certain things that are given to them. Sadly, in my view, unfortunately, over the last 250 years, that has been watered down, and the federal government has intruded into our lives more and more, and they've taken for themselves more and more power. But it was designed to make it very hard to pass legislation, but very easy to kill it. They didn't want government having a lot of power. And we don't have time to discuss how a bill becomes a law, but there are numerous hurdles that a bill has to overcome. 2 or 3 committee meetings on my end of the building, plus passing the House floor. Then it goes to the Senate, where it's got to go 2 or 3 more committee meetings, plus pass the Senate floor. If it's changed in any way, it's got to come back down here for approval. Then you got to get it past the governor, who could veto it anytime. And
let's pick it up there, Speaker. This is Speaker Philip Gunn. We'll see you right after this break.
Okay.
Special show here on Coast Vue today with the Speaker of the House, Philip Gunn. And when we went to break, he was explaining this incredible number of steps that have to happen. I've said this many times on my show before, that legislation, the process is slow for a purpose. It's to really keep big mistakes from happening. You know, sometimes you still make mistakes. You got to go back and correct them, et cetera. But it is a cumbersome process. And here's what I would say. Watching you and Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann do your jobs, the massive attention to detail that's required, the kind of leadership that you have to have in place that will help kind of shepherd things along. Boy, you had to be hitting on a lot of cylinders this last legislative session to get done what y'all got done.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of balls in the air. Just to give the viewers some perspective, there are about 3,000 bills filed every year between House and Senate. We have about anywhere from 15 to 1,700 filed on our end of the building. We have 122 members on our end of the building. That's 122 people with ideas, and they're going to file them in the form of a bill. On the other end, you got 52 senators. They normally have anywhere between 1,300 and 1,500 bills filed. So you add all that up, you're coming close to around 3,000 bills. That changes from year to year, but roughly, just for sake of the argument. So that's 3,000 bills that have to be read and contemplated and digested and considered. At the end of the day, we sign into law about a tenth of that. Somewhere between 250 to 300 are signed each year. And a lot of those are appropriation bills, which are really just passing out the money. They're not general bills with new pieces of legislation, so to speak. So the point is, there's a lot to be considered in a short 3-month window of time and digested. And we do have deadlines, fortunately, that force us to meet certain deadlines for legislation to be passed. Some states don't do that, and their legislature just stays in there until they decide to go home. That would be awful. We at least have deadlines that we have to comply with. But the hurdles that a bill has to go through are enormous. Like I said before the break, you got to pass through, every bill's got to go to a committee. The chairman of that committee could decide he doesn't like that bill and just kill it right there. One guy can kill a bill on my end of the building. Somebody could raise a point of order, and if it's legitimate, that could kill a bill. Same thing can happen on the Senate side. You fail to get the votes. It's easy to kill legislation. It's very hard to pass it. And the founders of our nation wanted it that way. So it does force debate and discussion, and that's good. That's why we have it that way, so that bills can go to committee, ideas can be debated, batted around. Is this good? Is it not? And hopefully you catch all the angles of a bill. But we all know that you can't always anticipate how things are going to play out, and we do have to come back and tweak them from time to time. Sometimes ideas are just not good, and you have to repeal them. But the process is very cumbersome. It's very laborious. And it's designed that way on purpose to make sure that we thoroughly debate, discuss, consider ideas before they go into law. Because when you pass a law, you're dictating to the people how they must live. And that's a big, big thing. And for those of us that are Republican like myself who believe in smaller government, reduced government, we're very cautious and careful not to be intrusive on the lives of our citizens any more than we have to be.
Listen, I mentioned the Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund. I had Ed Penny from Ducks Unlimited and Alex Littlejohn from the Nature Conservancy on SuperTalk Outdoors in the past week or so. Bright young conservation minds in the state, conservation leaders in the state. But anyway, I think we're going to hit the ground running. The Board of Trustees is in place now. They're going to be putting the staff together. I want to say thank you to your leadership in the House who introduced the bill initially. This is going to be a transformative bill. It's going to be something that our kids and our kids' kids are going to be super proud of us for putting in place. And now, with additional federal dollars available, we're going to be able to even take the match to a whole new level. So anyway, I know you look back. It's amazing. Even that, it took a couple of years to get it done. Complex deal. It has an incredible payback for Mississippi. The fact that was done within the guise of all these other things that we're talking about. What a sweet victory on that one.
I agree with that, and you made an excellent point, a point that I wanted to make, and that is that you have federal matching funds that will multiply those dollars. The way this works, and your listeners may be already aware of this, but we basically designated a portion of sales tax from sporting goods to the Outdoor Stewardship Fund, which is for those of us who are big hunters and fishermen. I know you're a big hunter. You've told me how great you are at hunting. And
not
I love
very
to
good
hunt
at all.
Do what?
Not very good at all. I enjoy the process.
I know, but I do too. I love to hunt and fish. My children love to hunt and fish. My grandchildren are now engaging in that. And for those of us who are outdoorsmen, this is a way that we can continue to promote that in Mississippi. And it's huge in Mississippi, not only because from an enjoyment standpoint for our citizens, but it is big business. We have a lot of people who come to our state to take advantage of the hunting and the fishing that we have here. So for those who buy, fishing poles and shotguns and whatever, the sales tax from that is put into a portion of that sales tax is now put into this fund. And those dollars can be used to draw down some additional federal dollars, which just further enhances our outdoor stewardship opportunities. So it's a no-brainer. It is something that was incredibly popular within the legislature. We did pass it last year. Unfortunately, it didn't make it through the process. Going back to what we talked about,
right,
how one individual can mess it up, but we got it done this year. And so that's going to change.
$10 million. Hopefully we'll have $20 million in subsequent years. It's been a pleasure to catch up with you, Philip Gunn, Speaker of the House. We really appreciate you taking your time with us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me on. Always good to be with you.
Stay in touch, my friend, and get some downtime. Enjoy some downtime. We'll see you soon. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.